In a seismic shift for the global automotive and motorcycle industries, the chief executives of three of Japan's most storied and influential motor companies, Yamaha's Yoshihiro Hidaka, Suzuki's Toshihiro Suzuki, and Kawasaki's Yasuhiko Hashimoto, jointly announced they will no longer sell their vehicles in the United States. The announcement came within hours of a policy declaration from newly elected U.S. President Donald Trump, who unveiled sweeping tariffs on trade partners, sending immediate shockwaves through the corridors of international commerce. The abrupt nature of the withdrawal caught both industry insiders and consumers by surprise, marking a dramatic realignment in how global vehicle manufacturers respond to nationalist economic policies. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. These companies, long embedded in the American market, celebrated for their reliability, performance, and affordability, made the difficult decision amid mounting pressures generated by the newly imposed tariffs, which targeted key imports from Japan and other nations considered by the Trump administration to have a disproportionate advantage in trade relationships. The financial burden of these tariffs has rendered continued operations in the U.S. financially untenable for these brands, whose business models rely heavily on competitive pricing and access to economies of scale. The cost of bringing their motorcycles, ATVs, personal watercraft, and compact vehicles to American consumers had ballooned overnight. For decades, Yamaha, Suzuki, and Kawasaki have been more than just foreign brands competing in the U.S. market. They've been foundational players in shaping American recreational culture. From the dirt trails of Utah to the highways of California, their machines have become cultural icons, each brand carrying its unique heritage, while converging on shared values of performance engineering and affordability. The decision to withdraw is not only a blow to consumer choice but also a loss of cultural connection. These machines have long been companions in American adventure, now unceremoniously pushed out by the shifting currents of global trade politics. The rationale for the exit lay squarely in the arithmetic of tariffs. The Trump administration's newly imposed duties applied a broad percentage increase on all vehicles and parts imported from countries deemed to have trade imbalances with the United States. Japan was among the nation's hardest hit, with tariffs reaching levels that threatened to double the retail price of imported motorcycles and compact vehicles. The manufacturers, unable to absorb such a steep cost increase and unwilling to pass the entirety onto customers, who would likely abandon their products for cheaper domestic alternatives, saw no feasible path forward. Even with localized assembly and limited domestic operations in the U.S., the supply chains remained heavily dependent on parts and components sourced from Japan, making tariff avoidance virtually impossible. Behind the scenes, the move signaled deep frustration. For companies that had built enduring reputations through decades of steady investment in dealer networks, service infrastructure, motorsport sponsorships, and community engagement, the decision to withdraw was not taken lightly. Executives reportedly convened in a rapid series of emergency meetings in Tokyo in the wake of Trump's announcement. What might have once been considered an impossible scenario, complete withdrawal from the world's largest consumer market, soon became the only rational option. Each of the three companies had slightly different market footprints, but all stood to lose significantly. Yamaha's presence in the U.S. extended well beyond motorcycles. It included musical instruments, marine engines, and power products, though the withdrawal pertains specifically to its vehicle operations. For Yamaha Motor Company, the U.S. had been a top-tier market for both off-road and on-road motorcycles, supported by a loyal customer base that valued the company's engineering precision and sporty design language. Suzuki, with its line of lightweight and economical motorcycles and compact cars, although it had already ceased car sales in the U.S. in 2012, remained a respected player in the two-wheeled segment. Kawasaki, whose powerful ninja sport bikes and utility-focused ATVs had carved out a formidable reputation, was perhaps the most synonymous with performance-focused motorcycling in the U.S. The implications for dealerships across the country were immediate and severe. Hundreds of authorized dealers, many of them family-owned businesses that had operated for decades, faced an uncertain future. With inventory pipelines cut and no assurance of future product supply, these establishments found themselves scrambling to adjust. Some may pivot to other brands still operating in the U.S., but for many, the loss of key product lines represented a critical disruption. Customer loyalty is a deeply rooted element in the motorcycle community, and the absence of these major Japanese brands threatens to unravel long-standing relationships between dealerships and their clientele. The impact on customers was no less profound. American riders have long leaned on these brands for affordable, reliable access to both commuter and recreational vehicles. With prices likely to surge even further for remaining imports or fall into scarcity for parts and accessories, ownership of a Yamaha, Suzuki, or Kawasaki motorcycle may soon become a logistical challenge. Beyond initial purchase, maintenance, parts availability, and aftermarket support are critical to the life of a motorcycle. The exit casts doubt over all of these aspects, potentially transforming proud owners into stranded riders. Enthusiasts who've built entire communities around these machines may find themselves cut off from the lifeblood of their passion. From a broader economic standpoint, the withdrawal underscores the interconnected nature of international trade and its vulnerability to political volatility. While the Trump administration framed the tariffs as a move to protect American manufacturing and reduce trade deficits, the immediate effect has been a reduction in product variety, a blow to small businesses, and potential price increases for consumers. Domestic brands may temporarily benefit from reduced competition, but whether they can meet the full spectrum of demand, particularly in niche or entry-level segments dominated by the Japanese brands, remains uncertain. Furthermore, with fewer choices on showroom floors, the consumer experience risks becoming homogenized and ultimately less competitive. The manufacturing landscape will also feel ripple effects. Although much of the production for US-bound vehicles occurred overseas, there were still elements of domestic activity, distribution centers, customization shops, and promotional teams that employed thousands. These operations, now rendered obsolete, will likely face layoffs or closures. Additionally, suppliers and logistics firms that counted on Japanese manufacturers for steady business will see their contracts vanish, further straining the broader supply chain ecosystem. On the international stage, the decision by Yamaha, Suzuki, and Kawasaki sends a message that may reverberate well beyond the motorcycle industry. It reveals how quickly and dramatically business strategies can be altered in response to government policy, and it highlights the precariousness of operating in an increasingly protectionist global economy. Other foreign manufacturers are now likely reassessing their positions in the US market. Even companies that currently enjoy healthy profit margins may begin exploring contingency plans should future policy changes render their operations unviable. In Japan, the move will undoubtedly be viewed with a mixture of disappointment and concern. The US has long been a vital market for the country's automotive exports, and the retreat of these three iconic brands underscores a growing challenge to Japan's export-dependent economy. The political and diplomatic ramifications could be considerable. Already, Japanese policymakers are likely engaging in high-level discussions to assess the broader economic impact and evaluate possible responses. Trade tensions between the two nations may escalate, especially if other sectors follow suit. Meanwhile, the European motorcycle industry could see a moment of opportunity. Brands like BMW, Ducati, KTM, and Triumph, though not immune to tariffs, may find slightly more wiggle room due to diversified production bases and different sourcing strategies. Still, they too face pricing challenges in the new tariff environment, meaning any gains could be short-lived or fraught with similar complications. American brands such as Harley-Davidson and Indian Motorcycles might enjoy a temporary sales boost, but they also must contend with a shifting market where value, innovation, and efficiency, hallmarks of the departing Japanese brands, have long set consumer expectations. Perhaps the most poignant aspect of the withdrawal is its symbolic resonance. For generations of American riders, the names Yamaha, Suzuki, and Kawasaki stood not merely for machines, but for freedom, craftsmanship, and adventure. Their departure leaves a vacuum that goes beyond commerce. It alters the very identity of motorcycling in America, reshaping not only what people ride, but how they ride and what they aspire to own. Whether on the racetrack, the trail, or the urban commute, these brands were woven into the fabric of American life. Now, that fabric has been torn, leaving behind a stark reminder of how policy and politics can transform consumer landscapes in an instant. The timing of this decision, so closely following Trump's inauguration and the announcement of the tariffs, adds an unmistakable edge of urgency. It wasn't a measured, phased withdrawal, it was abrupt and final. That kind of immediacy sends a clear signal not just to consumers but to other global companies with stakes in the American market. It serves as a case study in how deeply vulnerable even the most entrenched international brands are to the whims of nationalist trade policies. There's also an emotional component to the announcement, particularly for those inside the companies. Employees who've spent years nurturing the brand's American identities, marketers who crafted campaigns, engineers who adapted machines for US regulations, racing teams who competed under American flags, now find their efforts brought to an unforeseen halt. The sense of pride that came with watching a Yamaha R1 scream down the track at Daytona, or seeing a Suzuki GSX-R roll through downtown Los Angeles, or a Kawasaki mule crawling up a Montana hillside, is now tinged with an air of finality. Yet even in this moment of loss, the global motorcycle community remains resilient. Riders tend to be pragmatic and adaptive, finding new roads even when old ones close. It remains to be seen whether these companies might one day return, perhaps under new trade agreements or through revised economic strategies. But for now, the departure stands as one of the most dramatic exits from a major consumer market in modern automotive history. It is a reshuffling of power, presence, and potential that few could have predicted just weeks prior. The market will adjust, as it always does. New players may rise to fill the void. Domestic companies may expand their offerings. But the fingerprints of Yamaha, Suzuki, and Kawasaki on American culture will not easily fade. Their legacy is built into decades of engineering innovation, sporting achievement, and mechanical artistry. Their departure from the US market is not just a shift in logistics. It is a turning point in a larger narrative about trade, identity, and the evolving nature of global commerce in an age of political disruption. Whether this move ultimately benefits or harms the American economy in the long run is a question that only time can answer. But in the immediate sense, the absence of these companies will be felt deeply by the workers, the riders, the dealers, and the communities they touched. It is a bold, decisive end to a long-standing chapter, one closed not by market failure or technological irrelevance, but by the hard edge of geopolitical policy. The sudden exodus of Yamaha, Suzuki, and Kawasaki from the American market has created an industry vacuum with complexities that go far beyond the visible departure of products from showrooms. Beneath the surface, entire ecosystems that had developed in tandem with these manufacturers are now thrown into disarray. These companies didn't merely ship goods, they facilitated and sustained networks of racing teams, aftermarket part suppliers, training programs, technicians, engineers, and media content creators who built livelihoods around the continuous cycle of product innovation and consumer engagement. Their withdrawal cuts off the heartbeat of these systems, and the ensuing silence will echo far and wide. Take, for instance, the professional and amateur racing circuits that relied heavily on support and equipment from these Japanese brands. In the US, grassroots motocross events, road racing series, ATV competitions, and endurance rallies routinely featured Yamaha YZs, Suzuki DRZs, and Kawasaki KXs. These were not just popular choices, they were dominant presences. Factory teams, independent racing outfits, and even youth leagues leaned on these brands for consistency, performance, and parts availability. With the companies stepping away, entire segments of competitive motorsports are now left without one of their most critical lifelines. Teams that built their entire setup around a particular platform may find themselves forced to dismantle years of investment, technical refinement, and competitive edge, with little recourse. The aftermarket industry, too, finds itself confronting an existential question. Customization has always been a hallmark of motorcycle culture, and the Japanese Big Three provided rich canvases for creativity. Tens of thousands of small and mid-sized businesses, specializing in suspension upgrades, ECU tuning, aesthetic kits, exhaust systems, and protective accessories, crafted their products specifically for these models. The withdrawal doesn't just threaten future sales, it imperils the value of their existing inventory and R&D investments. Companies that had developed parts and services tailored for upcoming model years now find those designs obsolete before ever reaching consumers. With future production halted and existing units becoming rarities, demand will taper off rapidly. An equally critical layer of this disruption exists in the technical labor force that had specialized in Japanese motorcycles. Across the country, certified mechanics and technicians trained specifically on Yamaha, Suzuki, and Kawasaki platforms will see their skills suddenly devalued in the open market. Certifications obtained through manufacturer-sponsored programs, once considered gold standards, may lose their luster overnight. Vocational schools and community colleges that partnered with these companies to offer specialized training courses are left without corporate support or curriculum relevance. This devaluation of technical education affects both current professionals and the next generation of would-be mechanics, leaving gaps in both career trajectories and community-based service. Insurance companies, surprisingly, are also caught in the crossfire. Vehicle insurers rely heavily on predictable risk modeling and access to parts availability when calculating premiums and processing claims. A sudden disruption in the supply chain for repair parts will complicate everything from minor fender benders to major collision repairs. With parts becoming scarce or prohibitively expensive due to import barriers, insurers may be forced to hike premiums on remaining models, further pushing them out of the mainstream. At the same time, resale values of existing motorcycles may plunge as buyers grow wary of future maintenance hurdles. This, in turn, affects lenders and financing companies who hold paper on these machines, exposing them to increased risk from asset depreciation. Media outlets, content creators, and influencers within the motorcycle space are also experiencing the tremors. A considerable amount of online and print content revolves around product launches, ride reviews, comparisons, modifications, and tutorials featuring these Japanese brands. YouTube channels with hundreds of thousands of subscribers, magazines with decades of brand affiliation, and blogs that built loyal followings around specific model families now face a creative void. Monetization efforts linked to affiliate sales, sponsored content, and event coverage will be significantly diminished. Even motorcycle expos and conventions that once relied on the presence of these brands to draw crowds will need to recalibrate their offerings, potentially reducing attendance and sponsorship revenue. On a geopolitical level, the decision brings into sharp focus the delicate balance between economic nationalism and international cooperation. Japan, traditionally a close economic ally of the United States, now finds itself indirectly penalized for its industrial competitiveness. The Trump administration's tariffs, framed under the guise of protecting American interests, have effectively penalized some of the very trading partners that had helped sustain global stability through mutual prosperity. By imposing financial barriers, the U.S. has created a climate where even friendly nations must retreat from economic participation, not due to disinterest or underperformance, but because the basic rules of engagement have changed in a way that defies sustainable business logic. The withdrawal of Yamaha, Suzuki, and Kawasaki may also have implications for innovation and sustainability in the motorcycle industry. These companies have historically led the charge in pushing cleaner, more efficient technologies. Hybrid scooters, fuel injection systems, lightweight frames, and modular engines. Many of these advancements either originated from or were perfected by the Japanese Big Three. Their exit could slow down the pace of such innovation in the American market, particularly in areas like small displacement urban mobility and low-emission recreational vehicles. While electric vehicle startups continue to gain ground, they still lack the maturity, infrastructure, and engineering depth that these Japanese stalwarts brought to the table. American manufacturers, although benefiting from reduced foreign competition in the short term, may also find the new landscape challenging. With reduced external pressure to innovate or offer price-competitive products, there's a risk of complacency creeping in. This could ultimately hurt the consumer, who may face higher prices for a narrower range of options, fewer technological advancements, and limited performance tiers. Furthermore, U.S. brands, despite the protective environment, still operate within global supply chains and may themselves be vulnerable to retaliatory tariffs from foreign governments should diplomatic tensions escalate. One intriguing outcome of this shift could be the increased appeal of used motorcycles from the departing brands. With new inventory halted, pre-owned Yamaha, Suzuki, and Kawasaki models may become highly coveted, at least temporarily. This could create a vibrant gray market, where enthusiasts hoard models or import them through back channels to satisfy niche demand. However, this will not solve the long-term challenges associated with support, parts, and warranty coverage. Moreover, state-level regulations and enforcement of import controls could limit the viability of such parallel markets. Still, it opens the door for independent importers and resellers to play a more significant role in the market, potentially reshaping how motorcycles are sourced and sold in the US. From a cultural perspective, the decision introduces a shift in how Americans view foreign products. The Japanese motorcycle brands were long seen not just as imports, but as part of the fabric of American motor culture. They appeared in films, music videos, television shows, and video games. They were ridden by soldiers returning from deployments, by suburban teens seeking weekend freedom, by couriers zipping through city traffic, and by veterans of the open road. Their logos are tattooed on skin, emblazoned on jackets, and etched into the memories of millions. Their withdrawal risks not just economic contraction, but a fraying of a shared cultural language built over decades. In certain sectors, like the educational and safety training space, the loss will also be tangible. Riding schools across the nation often use Yamaha and Suzuki models for beginner and intermediate training programs due to their balance of size, weight, and reliability. These schools will now be forced to either seek alternative brands, many of which may be costlier or less ideally suited, or reduce their course offerings altogether. This could have a downstream effect on road safety, as fewer accessible training programs could result in a decline in new rider readiness and skill. As entry points into the hobby become more difficult to access, the overall pipeline of future enthusiasts could narrow. Logistical operations, which have quietly underpinned the success of these brands for decades, will also grind to a halt. Warehouses across the United States, used for parts distribution, final vehicle assembly, and dealer fulfillment, are now liabilities rather than assets. Shipping agreements, transportation fleets, port allocations, and customs operations will need to be unraveled or redirected. Entire departments within the companies devoted to managing U.S. logistics are facing redundancy. The loss of these infrastructure hubs could further destabilize regional economies that had come to depend on them, particularly in areas where such centers represented significant employers. The impact on innovation hubs and R&D satellite offices within the U.S. is another less obvious but deeply concerning casualty. While the core research often occurred in Japan, U.S.-based design teams played a pivotal role in adapting models for American tastes and regulatory environments. California, for instance, housed multiple facilities where designers and engineers worked on fine-tuning motorcycles to meet EPA guidelines, respond to local style trends, or adapt ergonomics for American body types and riding habits. These sites contributed not only to the global competitiveness of the brands, but also served as incubators for local engineering talent. Their shuttering marks the loss of cross-cultural innovation spaces, reducing opportunities for collaborative design and shared technological growth. The broader implication for global trade narratives is impossible to ignore. Yamaha, Suzuki, and Kawasaki stepping away from the US market is not just a story about motorcycles, it's a cautionary tale about how trade policy, when wielded as a blunt instrument, can disrupt intricate and long-standing economic relationships. It highlights the fragility of international interdependence and warns of the consequences when that balance is upset without nuanced consideration. Protectionist policies may offer political points in the short term, but the long-term consequences can be staggering, especially when they drive out companies that brought more benefit than harm to the market. In the world of international diplomacy, these moves may necessitate a recalibration of trade negotiations. Japan may seek to raise the issue in bilateral talks, citing the forced withdrawal of its leading companies as evidence of unfair economic treatment. Other countries may use this development as leverage to renegotiate their own terms, or as justification for enacting similarly aggressive tariffs. The ripple effect of this disruption could well extend beyond motorcycles, influencing policy decisions in unrelated industries like electronics, agriculture, and pharmaceuticals. As with many paradigm shifts, this moment also presents opportunities for new players. Emerging brands from regions not heavily targeted by the tariffs, perhaps from Southeast Asia, India, or even South America, may see this as a chance to break into a highly competitive and now partially vacated US market. Companies like Royal Enfield or CF Moto may look to scale their presence, offering affordable alternatives in segments where Japanese dominance was previously unassailable. However, establishing credibility, reliability, and dealer support on the scale of the Big Three will take years, if not decades. The consumer response to all of this will unfold in real time. There will be anger and confusion among brand loyalists, many of whom formed emotional attachments to their bikes. Forums, clubs, and riding groups will buzz with speculation, nostalgia, and frustration. Buyers will weigh whether to switch allegiance or double down on the models they already own. In some quarters, there will be boycotts, not just of US-made motorcycles, but of the broader political mechanisms that allowed this rupture to occur. Where things go from here is uncertain. New players will rise, strategies will shift, and consumers will adapt. But the shadow left by the withdrawal of these three titans will linger for years. Their departure is more than the end of an era. It is the opening of a new, uncharted chapter in American motorcycling, where absence speaks louder than presence, and where the echoes of engines past may long outlast the roar of those still on the road. The reverberations caused by Yamaha, Suzuki, and Kawasaki's abrupt exit from the US market extend far beyond the immediate stakeholders. As the news settles into public consciousness, new layers of impact are beginning to materialize across disciplines not traditionally associated with the motorcycle industry. Architecture, urban planning, law, finance, education, and even public policy are now facing the need to recalibrate strategies that, until recently, took the stable presence of these companies for granted. Urban planning, for one, is subtly but significantly influenced by transportation trends. For decades, municipalities in cities like Portland, Austin, Denver, and San Diego included motorcycle accessibility in their traffic flow studies and infrastructure designs. Lightweight and agile motorcycles, such as those offered by the Japanese manufacturers, were often promoted as a sustainable alternative to cars, reducing congestion and pollution in densely packed environments. Bike lanes were widened, specialized parking zones were created, and incentives were introduced to encourage two-wheeled commuting. Now, with the disappearance of brands that provided a large portion of the commuter-friendly fleet, those policies are left on shaky ground. Planners who had envisioned a more diverse vehicle landscape must now contend with a potential reversal of progress. Insurance actuaries and financial analysts are likewise facing new uncertainties. Analysts who projected stable revenue based on historical consumer behavior patterns are being forced to revise their models. Not only are future unit sales disrupted, but also the secondary markets. Repairs, warranties, extended service contracts, and upgrade incentives are effectively frozen. Businesses that had bundled financial services with motorcycles, including credit unions and motorcycle-specific lenders, are seeing a spike in loan defaults and early payoffs as the perception of long-term product viability diminishes. This destabilization bleeds into adjacent industries, especially credit risk evaluation and leasing programs that relied heavily on predictable depreciation curves. Legal sectors, especially intellectual property law and contract law, are suddenly busy with implications from the shutdown. Contracts between manufacturers and their US dealers, many of them multi-year agreements with stipulations about inventory thresholds, marketing obligations, and brand exclusivity, must now be negotiated, terminated, or enforced. Lawsuits may emerge from dealerships that feel abandoned without compensation or sufficient notice. At the same time, questions around intellectual property rights over the now discontinued models and accessories, especially those developed in cooperation with US companies, are surfacing. Licensing agreements for branded merchandise, video game appearances, movie product placements, and co-developed safety technology are being reviewed, renegotiated, or terminated altogether. Consumer behavior itself is entering a transitional period. The disappearance of trusted Japanese brands creates a psychological void that isn't easily filled. Consumer trust, especially in a market as personal as motorcycling, is not transferred overnight. Riders often stay loyal to brands because of consistent experiences, smooth performance, dependable customer service, predictable maintenance costs. The abrupt removal of that sense of reliability triggers insecurity. Potential first-time buyers may choose to delay purchasing altogether, waiting to see how the industry settles. This could cause a drop in overall motorcycle sales nationwide, not just for the departed brands, but for their competitors as well. The educational system, particularly in vocational and mechanical engineering streams, is facing a subtle but growing crisis. Technical programs that trained students on Japanese engines and diagnostic tools were highly regarded due to the ubiquity and complexity of these machines. The withdrawal now renders a significant portion of that curriculum obsolete. Students enrolled in multi-year programs may graduate into a job market that no longer values their specialized knowledge. Educational institutions are caught between having to rapidly update their programs or risk falling behind industry standards, a task that requires funding, partnerships, and time that many schools do not have readily available. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on Yamaha, Suzuki, and Kawasaki exiting the US market? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching and see you next time.